Good morning. Um, I I look kind of funny today. We're at the clinic here in Lower Alabama, Foley, on the eastern shore of Alabama, and it's near Gulf Shores. And I'm just trying to get some stuff ready for the event, some last minute preparations. Hold on just a second. Did I lose my? Here we go. Today we're going to be talking about the calcium score. And it reminds me of one of my favorite movies, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly by Clint Eastwood, because there's some really good stuff that you can get out of most of these, a lot of these ways of looking at plaque. Plaque's important. It's something that causes the vast majority of heart attack, stroke, so therefore death and disability. But we don't really have good ways of measuring plaque yet. One of the tools, the standard is Framingham, followed by a stress test, followed by a coronary angiography in the cath lab, usually followed by a stent. And that really doesn't predict or prevent heart attacks. There are better ways to do that. That's what the book is all about. One of the better ways is the calcium score. So we're going to talk a little bit more about calcium score today. But before we do, let's go back and talk about some of the other things that we've covered in terms of the pardon me, but we're at the wrong place on the deck. Let's go back and talk about some of the other stuff that we have available on the channel. Then we'll get into the discussion of the coronary artery calcium score. Again, this channel is all about helping people prevent the things that are killing them, the things that are disabling them. And it's not just in the US, not just in the developed world now, it's all over the world. Chronic diseases are becoming the big issue. The big risks: heart attack, stroke, dementia, Alzheimer's. And these things, by far, in a way, have one big risk factor. Unfortunately, that risk factor is terribly underdiagnosed. It's diabetes and even prediabetes. If you hear your doctor say, you got a touch of sugar, be afraid. Be very, very afraid. And so, because here's why. Even though prediabetes may be a major cause of plaque and heart attack, therefore heart attack and stroke, it's not really diagnosed very well. The science is really clear. The vast majority of primary care doctors don't understand how to diagnose prediabetes, let alone how to treat it. So that's what this channel is all about, helping you in your journey. Because if the vast majority of primary care docs don't know how to diagnose prediabetes, that leaves us in a buyer beware or patient beware environment. How do you find out? How can you diagnose and make sure that you don't have significant risk factors for heart attack and stroke that your doctor's just missing? Well, again, that's what this channel is all about. We talk about ways to find that out. We have things called webinars where you can join. You can get something like a calcium score or a CIMT. Actually, we're going to be having a CIMT webinar coming up in a few weeks. Our friend David Mintz has been doing a lot of his CIMT activities. He's back on the road again. If you'd like to find out where he's going to be, please let us know. Call Michelle at 859-721-1414. That's 859-721-1414. And she can coordinate with David to let you know where he will be in terms of getting a CIMT. We also have webinars on insulin resistance, how you can get the definitive testing for insulin resistance, and join us in a group session to talk about, okay, what's bad, what's not, because again, not only do the vast majority of doctors not get this definitive type of testing, they don't really know how to interpret it when they do. And it's, again, something that if you're going to protect your health, you got to learn yourself. Now, it's not as bad as it sounds, because I've got hundreds of people doing this. And when you start looking at the channel viewership, we're over 100,000 now. And we get these kind of comments on a regular basis. Doc, you saved my life. I decided to take your test, and guess what? I don't have prediabetes. I've got full-blown diabetes. And you know what? I decided that I understand now I can't effectively metabolize carbohydrates. So I've started to back off on carbohydrates in my diet. Guess what happened? I stopped eating corn chips. I lost 20 pounds, and that's a real comment. That's from Old Alabama Gardener, OAG. He's left several comments similar to that, and he's actually done a couple of videos with us. So there's plenty of ways that you can learn this. It's not that hard, and guess what? It saves your life. If you don't want to do a webinar, if you'd rather do more of a course type of format, we've got courses that can help you do that. I'm going to skip over these last things and just mention one other thing. So one of the things that we're doing is a series on the Prevention Myths book. The Prevention Myths book, Todd and I put out about 3 or 4 months ago. It's all about how a stress test is not going to be able to predict your heart attack. Who's the poster boy for that? Big Russ, Tim Russert. He had a stress test, passed it with flying colors, and died in his office 3 months later from a heart attack. And it's because a stress test can't prevent a heart attack. He's not alone. That happens all the time. Yet we still depend on it to the tune of what, 8 million a year? Despite the fact that not only does that work, well, you could say, well, those are just anecdotal stories with Tim Russert and some others. No, the studies have been done. The Orbita trial, the Courage trial, they have shown stress tests don't predict heart attack, and stents don't prevent heart attack. Now, there's a time for a stent for sure, and that's usually in terms of treatment of a heart attack. And there's clearly time for stress tests, but not nearly so much as we're doing. If we could just take a tiny portion, 1 or 2% of the resources that we spend on cardiac cath, stents, stress tests, and put them behind other things like calcium score, CT angiogram, and especially IMT, we would be in such a better place in terms of understanding where plaque is. Now, calcium score, I mean, if you listen to people like Ivor Cummins, a lot of folks that have watched my channel have watched Ivor's as well. He and I tended to go right along the same lines until we sort of separated just a little bit in terms of the COVID thing. But we're still in the same place in terms of focusing on diabetes. Now, another place where Ivor Cummins and I are slightly different is that he relies almost entirely on the calcium score. His funding comes from an entrepreneur whose life was saved by the calcium score. And the calcium score is a great study. However, you got to know how to use it and when to use it. I had another patient just a couple of weeks ago who did the work. He found out he had significant risk. He had a positive calcium score. He got started. He did significant weight loss. He found out that he had some insulin resistance challenges, not a whole lot, but enough to cause some of these problems. He lost a lot of weight. He got where he needed to be. And he said, I'm going to do a victory lap. I want to see how my calcium score is now. It increased by several hundred. And it's like, but that wasn't supposed to happen. You know, if I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. And if I've said it once on this channel, I've said it 1,000 times. Be careful that you know what you're working with when you order one of these studies. The bottom line is when we work with somebody who's got soft plaque, when we work with somebody who's got plaque, our goal is to calcify it. And doing the right thing, doing the weight loss to decrease those cytokines in your bloodstream, improving your exercise, improving your daily glucose levels in your blood. Those things are going to result in calcification of any plaque that you might have had, whether it was noticed on previous studies or not. So be careful, because again, that's what usually happens. You get plaque, you start improving your health, and then that plaque turns into calcium. So let's talk about it a little bit more deeply. Plaque's important. How do you measure it? Framingham, stress test, coronary angiography. Those are the standards that you see in the medical community today. And then, there are things like ankle brachial index, which it's exciting, it's cheap, it's a do-it-yourself, but there's a lot of challenges with that one. The three that I recommend are calcium score, IMT, and CT angiogram. Let's get a little bit deeper in each of those. So why do I have the comments that I have regarding these things? Well, again, plaque is important. It's the major cause of heart attack, stroke, and very much associated with Alzheimer's. How do we screen and measure for plaque? Well, Framingham is the way your doctor starts, whether you know it or not. And unfortunately, it's not a measurement, it's a guess. Even more unfortunately, it's a bad guess. How do I know that? Well, again, we've done videos on that. We'll do some again later to help people understand how. With Framingham, the estimate numbers, the formula that go into it are based on data that's 10, 13, even 20 years old in some cases. And here's what happens. The risk was very different then. And especially with women, we'll see Framingham give you twice the risk that you actually have in many, many cases. So guess what? We talk about docs putting people on statins all the time. Well, one of the major things that we have for decisions regarding statins is Framingham, which doubles the risk of half of our population. It's like, are we thinking? Stress tests, 8 million a year, and they don't predict heart attack. So why are we doing them? Because everybody thinks that it's all plumbing in there. No, people tend to not think about, no, maybe it's not plumbing, maybe it's inflammation. So then you go to the PC angiogram, percutaneous angiogram, or cardiac cath. Do you really want to go to the cath lab? Get a large needle and tube stuck into the artery in your groin, thread it up to your heart, and start taking pictures. Once you're there, it's really hard to reverse that process, and you're usually way down that slippery slope to getting instrumentation, stents. Despite as ugly as that sounds, my major concern with cath labs and even stents is not so much that they cause danger in and of themselves. Here's the problem. Too many people think that the definitive treatment has been done. I don't have to worry about it. And instrumentation is not the definitive treatment. Again, the Orbita trial, the Courage trials, even the ischemia trials. With the Orbita trials and the Courage trials, they said stents don't predict heart attacks or don't prevent heart attacks. And with with that, a lot of the medical community said, well, okay, well, it's just got to be a full-blown bypass, CABG, coronary artery bypass graft. Well, the ischemia trial came along and looked at CABG as well, and CABG, bypass graft, doesn't prevent heart attack and stroke either. So it's like, so what does? I hate to tell you, but it's improving your lifestyle. It's losing the extra weight that you know you need to lose. It's managing your diet, managing your nutrition, doing the exercise, doing the hard work that you need to do. Back to the script, in terms of looking at plaque, again, what's wrong with ABI? It's do it yourself, but it's too difficult for the vast majority of us to interpret appropriately because there's too many if-thens associated with it. I, for example, have a totally normal ankle brachial index, but we know I have plaque. We know I have plaque enough to where if I let myself go, I could end up with a heart attack. You could argue about whether or not I've had full-blown diabetes. That's an academic point. I've got enough plaque to cause these problems. So, and I can tell you, I'm not getting a stent for that. I'm managing my lifestyle. So again, here are the three ways of looking at plaque, measuring plaque that I would recommend, seeing plaque that I'd recommend, CT angiogram, calcium score, and IMT. Now, each of them has its strong points. Each of them has its weak points. With the CT angiogram, it's expensive. The research base is not entirely there yet, but you know what? It's not entirely there yet for calcium score or IMT either. And it's not really looking so much at peripheral plaque, but that's not really the question for most of these. CT angiogram is an up-and-comer. One of the major advantages to two major advantages to CT angiogram. Number one, your standard medical community, not guys that are using calcium score or IMT, but your regular docs are looking at CT angiogram. And because it's, well, maybe I'm being a little bit pejorative here, but my perspective is because it's high tech, because it's expensive, because it involves a CT machine, they're comfortable with that. And you're seeing a lot of it in the research now. The Scott Hart trial looked at CT angiogram, and it made it really clear that that is an effective way to start looking at potential heart attack and stroke. Calcium score. The good part, it's inexpensive. It's another good part. It's really easy to find. Your X-rays on us down on the corner down the street probably has calcium score available. Some insurance companies are finally starting to pay for it, but even if they don't, or we're talking usually $100, it's worth it. What are the downsides? Well, it's good for screening. It does have radiation. There's one of these systems, one of these processes that doesn't. IMT does not have radiation. CT angiogram does. Calcium score does. But if you're talking about risk for heart attack and stroke in a 50, 60-year-old person, the risk associated from the radiation on a calcium score is just insignificant. It's not insignificant for screening studies for kids coming out of the womb, though. And IMT, you've seen tens of thousands of IMTs done on kids coming out of the womb because there is no radiation. What's the biggest disadvantage of calcium score? Well, because it doesn't show soft plaque, it only shows calcified plaque, you end up with the situation that I described at the beginning, where people develop plaque, they develop soft plaque, they're in a cardiovascular inflammation mode, and then they find out, they turn it around, and they expect to see an improvement on their calcium score, and more times than not, they see the exact opposite. Now, Matthew Budoff has said, no, there's a way to do follow-up. We'll talk about that in a minute. He really didn't convince a whole lot of people, and I'm one of them. So, further information about calcium score. It's a measurement of the quantity of the calcium in the arteries of the heart using CT, computer tomography. It's a good screening tool for cardiovascular disease. It is not great for tracking or monitoring progression of disease risk. The calcium shows up as a bright white area in the image of the coronary arteries. The presence of any calcium, as indicated by any calcium score greater than 0, indicates that there is plaque or atherosclerosis in the coronary arteries. I don't think we have that in the slides or the script today, but I'll just make a quick comment. There are multiple studies that have shown if you've got a calcium score of 0, you really, really should push back if your doc wants to put you on a statin. So yet another place where just using your LDL level, your cholesterol level, is not the most appropriate place. It's not the most appropriate goal for using statins. There are other things to look at, other things to think about. Now, this test, the calcium score, is easily accessible. It's relatively inexpensive and very well standardized. Compared to the IMT, that's actually one of the major problems with IMT. The major advantages to IMT are, number one, you can see soft plaque. And number two, you can see progression. There are still challenges even in the best quality shops like Todd Eldridge's, where you can see some changes where you have to interpret what they actually mean. But by far, the biggest advantage to IMT is the ability to see soft plaque. You're not going to see that on an IMT. Here's the guidelines. They're for the ACC, American College of Cardiology, and AHA, the American Heart Association. See, I'll talk many times in the book and other places about the standards committees. This is what a standards committee does. They develop these standards. They make the recommendations. They'll put it in an article in one of the related magazines, and it'll be anywhere from a dozen to 6 dozen pages on how and when they recommend using a certain thing at a certain time. Now, this is the Standards Committee guideline on management of blood cholesterol. So again, as you can see, you already see the perspective of this this committee. They're already coming out of the blocks saying it's all about cholesterol. Let's skip over that. That's not the topic for today. The report of the American College of Cardiology and American Heart Association Task Force on Clinical Practice Guidelines, what it should be focused on is preventive guidelines. So here's where they fell on coronary artery calcium. Coronary artery calcium testing may be considered in adults 40 to 75 without diabetes and with LDL cholesterol levels greater than or equal to 70. At a 10-year atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease risk greater than 7.5%, up to 20% if a decision about statin therapy is uncertain. Do I agree with that? And is that how I use it? No. I'll tell you in a minute how and when I tend to use it. It's a level 2B recommendation, which means it's prudent and it's usable in certain instances. So that's sort of a lukewarm, kind of recommendation from that standards committee. But again, as you see, that standards committee is almost complete. To them, it's not even a guideline on heart attack and stroke prevention. It's a guideline on cholesterol. That's their view of preventive medicine. So again, all that may sound lukewarm at best, and many of you in listening to me and hearing that may say, well, who cares what they have to say anyway? Well, I'm not going to go there. That's not the purpose for these discussions today. I will say that even this is a major move forward for that standards committee for calcium score. It's been, several decades, they've said, no, we don't recommend it. Now, I mentioned how and when I use calcium score. Let me talk. I don't use it in all of these places, but I do in a few. Screening for moderate Framingham risk, medication question. That's that's certainly a reasonable time to use it. Again, in most of my patients, I have a fairly good opportunity to get an IMT. I tend to use that more. So, for example, on my patients, 80 to 90% will get an IMT. 3 to 5% has a calcium score, and that's all we can get, and that's what we function from. The second item, rule out risk. And I mentioned a minute ago, there's several good studies indicating if you have a 0 calcium score, you have probably zero risk. Now, those of you who know this space may be thinking, well, what if somebody's got nothing but soft plaque? That does happen, but it's pretty rare, very rare. In fact, I've seen it. But again, you have some other tip-offs. You have obesity problems, you have family history issues, and you know that patient's maybe in their 50s and they've got a significant family history, tending to happen more in the 60s. You've got plenty of evidence to suspect that they're starting to get into this age where they're starting to develop calcium and plaque. Speaking of age, you may see this image right over here on the right. Look at this image, interpret it, and tell me that age has nothing to do with heart attack and stroke risk or calcification risk. And it's just very, very clear. So many people think that the diabetes and prediabetes and heart attack and stroke epidemic has everything to do with obesity. Yes, obesity is very important, but aging is even more important. Think about that, be aware, and let me get back to the script. I mentioned Matthew Budoff. In 2013, he said you can actually use a calcium score to track progression. Like I said, he's a big, big fan of calcium score, but he really did not convince a whole lot of people that calcium score is a great way to follow risk. And I'm one of them. I don't think it's a good way to follow risk because I run into more problems with people like the patient I just described at the beginning of the presentation saying, I did all the stuff. I expect to have a huge I lost 40 pounds. I'm expecting I'm going to have a huge decrease in calcium score. I'm going to get one of those. And I'm over there saying, oh, please be careful. Think about not doing it. And if you do it, please be aware that you may get a significant increase. And okay, doc, I hear you, but I want to go ahead and get it. Well, doc, I am upset. My calcium score didn't go down. It didn't stabilize. It went way up. And I look at the formulas in research, and they say if you're going up 20, 25% per year, you've got major increase in risk. I lost 40 pounds. I jumped up much more than 20%. That research is telling me I've got a huge amount of risk. And it's like, if I've asked you many times, please don't get a calcium score and expect it to give you that kind of clarity on decreasing risk. We know from what you've been doing clinically, you don't lose 40 pounds. You don't get a decrease in your triglyceride over HDL ratio from 4 down to less than 1. You don't get all of those things happening. You don't get a decrease in your hemoglobin A1C from 6.5 down to 5.2. You don't see all those things happening without a decrease in heart attack and stroke risk. Yet your calcium score went up. So which are you going to believe? I can tell you what I believe, but I can't tell you what you should believe. Now, here's one place where I do. There are a couple of places where I use it. As I said, I'll use them in about 5% of my patients. And it's usually when we don't have access to a good IMT. improving compliance. I get a huge number of patients that come from to my channel. I don't know, maybe 20 or 30% of them, maybe more, actually come to the channel practice because they got a positive calcium score. Getting that positive calcium score is a major wake-up call. And if you haven't seen the movie The Widowmaker, I think it's worth taking a look. I think it's a good movie. It goes into the details and the history of how the calcium score was created. It was also funded by the same Irish entrepreneur who funds Ivor Cummins' channel. So again, that's Matthew Budoff, early study, Budoff study, 2006 on coronary calcium score, when they were just beginning to understand a lot of the details for calcium score. Now, you may have heard of Agatston. You probably haven't heard of MESA. MESA is a trial, a series of trials that were done recently, actually a database where trials were done. And they actually compared some new ways of looking at calcium score to the old standard. The old standard is Agatston, the Agatston score. The Agatston score was developed in 1990. Well, let me go back and just mention this. So what are these scores? Well, you get, as I said before, and I showed a picture of it, when you get a calcium score, you get a picture. So, well, there's one right there. You get a picture. Now, is there a way to quantify this? And the answer is yes, there is. One of the first ways proposed to do that, and it's the standard, was proposed by a cardiologist named Arthur Agatston, who lives in South Florida. And we'll mention that again a little bit later. Agatston developed his score for CT calcium in 1990. It has many populations indexed to it. It also includes some incorrect assumptions about calcification. It misses the fact that non-calcified plaque is more dangerous because it's more vulnerable to rupture. But in fact, that's not just an Agatston problem. That is a complete, any calcium score that you do is going to have that problem. Now, MESA. So when they did the MESA studies, they started, like I said, looking at maybe there's some better ways of scoring a calcium score, and maybe we can get over some of the challenges we had with the Agatston score. They did do they got some better interpretation, and it's actually a better scoring system, but you just don't see it. Agatston was the first, it was the predominant, it was the best when it came out. And again, all of the index populations are indexed to Agatston. So I really I'll be surprised if we ever see the MESA quantification system take over from Agatston. So let's go back, and all of that was some really geeky doctor science, which I do way too much of. Let's talk about a patient. This is Neil. That's not actually Neil. That's a beauty shot we found off the internet. I wasn't going to use Neil's actual image. At 57, Neil told his doctor, and that was me. I was one of his doctors, a consultant to him. He said, Doc, and this is when he first came to me. He said, I know I've got maybe 6 years to live. I want to get some things done because I know I'm going to be dying soon. And I said, why do you say you've only got 6 years to live? Well, he replied, because I've got calcium in my heart. I've got a score of almost 300. I know there are plenty of people listening today who have scores over 1,000. I've got plenty of patients with scores well over 1,000, multiple thousands. And I said that to him, and it was like, I didn't hide from him. I wanted to take his concerns seriously, but I also wanted him to take my reaction seriously. A calcium score of 300, an Agatston score of 300 is not a death sentence. Let me repeat, a calcium score of 300 is not a death sentence. And for those of you with a calcium score over 1,000, That's not a death sentence either. It's not. You can control this. So to get back to the script, I told Neil, consider the fact that 70% of people age 57, your age, Neil, have a positive calcium score. 300 is not a death sentence. According to Agatston, 300 is moderate risk. Neil was 5 feet 10 and weighed 240 pounds. Well, guess what? We found a couple of the two most dominant risk factors. What were the two? Obviously, you're probably looking at that and saying, well, Brewer, he's the same height you are. You weigh 160, 155. He weighs 240. That's a problem. That's correct. And he doesn't, and I can tell you, he did not look like Arnold Schwarzenegger when he won the Mr. Olympia contest. He did not have that kind of muscle definition, and he did not have a 32-inch waist. His waist was over 40. So he had a lot of body fat. That was clearly one of the risk factors, one of the major risk factors, but he had another one, which again, as we've said many times, is even more important. He was 57 years old. So age and obesity are doing this to countless people. He did have work to do. And if it's successful, he could expect decades more of healthy life. And that was clearly my message to him. So the first thing we did with Neil was get an IMT. We knew Neil had plaque, but we wanted to know how much of that was active. He had slowed down he had started a diet. It was more of a plant-based diet. Wasn't really watching carbs so much at that time. We were alarmed. His arteries were the equivalent of somebody over 80 years of age. And we see that a lot. Significant plaque, a lot of it was soft. And that enabled us to get aggressive with Neil's treatment, diet, exercise. He did have he did have plaque. So I don't recommend statins usually based on LDL alone. I recommend it based on presence of plaque mostly. He had it. I recommended it. He did agree to statins. He had high blood pressure, and he had diabetes, not prediabetes. He had full-blown diabetes. His blood sugar went way over 200 when we challenged it. And guess what? His fasting glucose was 93. So his other doctors had always said, you don't have a glucose problem. No, he didn't have prediabetes. Yes, he had a glucose problem. He had full-blown diabetes. So he got off, he started saying, I can't eat carbs. So he got on metformin. He got on blood pressure medication. He lost 40 pounds. Now, he actually decided to go back off of his metformin. He needed to go off of his hypertension medication because he started getting a little bit dizzy when he would bend over, having some of that problem. He went from a state of having inflammation in his arteries to no inflammation. Now, guess what? His calcium score went up another 400 from 300 to 700. And guess what? You can probably predict the story again. So first of all, I discouraged him about getting those. And secondly, when he did, he calmed down and he said, well, you're right. You told me that. It was clear that I had a lot of soft plaque in there, and it was clear that I calcified it. Neil's in a good place now. So here's some follow-up comments. The coronary calcium score measures calcium. It doesn't measure plaque. You use calcium, the measured calcium, as an estimate of plaque. And you say, well, why would it, if it doesn't measure soft plaque, why would you be comfortable saying someone on someone with a 0 calcium score doesn't need to have treatment, doesn't need to have statins? Well, I tell you what, again, if somebody with a 0 calcium score is obese, they're 57 years old, I do get worried about that individual, and I want to get a CIMT for that individual, because for that individual, I am worried that they may have plaque, but nothing but soft plaque. The reason calcium is such a good helps us provide estimates is that if you've gone into this mode of making soft plaque and then reversed it, which happens, this is a cyclical issue more than anything else. It's not just it's not just a straight line progression, especially in the days here now where people are losing 40 pounds. A lot of people are doing that. And so then you get more of this up and down progression. Usually you don't get rid of all your plaque, all of your calcium, even if you reverse your risk. In fact, as I've been saying multiple times, you often increase that calcium. So bullet number 2, it's a great screening tool, but there is significant risk. It's not huge risk. It's not significant for a 60-year-old with probable plaque, but it is a significant risk for a 20-year-old that's healthy. Clearly a significant risk for kids, for infants, for 5-year-olds. So you're not going to see this used as a screening tool for those healthy populations. Why is that the case? Because of the radiation. The radiation, they get better and better and better and use less and less and less radiation. For your typical patient in their 60s, I'm not worried about the radiation, but we will not see screening for 5-year-olds for this, or 20-year-olds. And guess what? It's not great for follow-up. As much as you want to use it, it's not great for follow-up. Why? The gradation's not specific either. And again, I think we've gotten there. I think we've described some of the pros and the cons. In fact, we've described maybe the good, the bad, the ugly. Now, of calcium score. I mentioned at some point that I was going to talk about Arthur Agatston and how I knew that he lived in South Florida. He wrote the South Beach Diet book. That was one of the first books where they started saying, you know what, we really need to start taking a look at carbs and insulin and some of those things. So last slide, I believe. The test is not harmless. The radiation danger is minimal, especially for people that are in major risk areas in their life. Calcified plaque is safer than soft plaque by factors higher than 6x. I didn't include the Honda study here. I've included it multiple times in multiple videos, and I think it was even available. We covered it about a month ago, where we showed the risk in plaque that doesn't have calcium versus plaque that does have calcium. And as we said, it's actually higher than 6 times the risk in plaque with no calcium. So that fact that non-calcified plaque is more dangerous than calcified plaque creates a paradox. If calcification is a sign of plaque healing and stabilization, then why are higher coronary calcium scores indicative of greater risk? Well, the bottom line is it shows that you've been through that cycle of laying down plaque and reversing that inflammation, calcifying that plaque, then going back into it, laying down more plaque, and then calcifying that. There's evidence that higher calcium scores represents higher overall plaque generation. That's what the process I just described. But we can find soft plaque even though there's no calcium. Calcium score doesn't detect soft plaque. So if Gilbert, if you'll give us the water ball, we will go into question and answer. So we've got a lot of people and a lot of comments. I doubt very much that I'm going to get through all of these today. So if I don't get to your comment, again, please put it in the video itself when it's posted. And if you still need more personal focus, then you can call Michelle at 859-721-1414. That's 859-721-1414. Or if you're here in on the Eastern Shore of Alabama, you can come see us at the Jubilee Clinics. So, Amer, hi from Germany. Bart Robinson, good morning. Absolutely looking forward to this topic. John Tocho, excellent topic. And me, calcium score, the good, the bad, and the ugly. For those of you who've seen the movie, maybe you remember what I'm talking about. Bill H., good morning from Brentwood, Tennessee. Martha Reich, good morning. I think that's Gilbert telling you where you can get some more videos, more information, more content from us. Rose Vander Regen, why won't insurance pay for the coronary calcium score? Oh, well, that's what I said. I thought I covered that, but maybe I didn't. The standards committees were very iffy on calcium score and are still a little bit iffy. You're not starting to see some insurance companies pay for a calcium score, but not many. Because of the standards committees. They'd rather look at cholesterol. Bart Robinson, good morning to you, Martha. Peter Utsi, good morning. Good evening from Estonia. I think I've seen your name before, but didn't know you were from Estonia. And I don't remember anybody coming in from Estonia before. Rose Vander Regen, great theme song. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Yep. I wish we could get that, but I'm sure that has one of those copyrights on it. And I think that would be a great theme song for the whole channel. E.T. himself, morning from Canada. I didn't know you were from Canada, E.T. Thanks for making us aware. Just Rusty, acknowledging the greatness of good, the bad, the ugly, it raises your reputation in my eyes. Thank you. I appreciate that. Just Rusty. Rose Vander Regen, laugh out loud. And you know me from where? Excellent movie. Be very afraid. Yes, be very afraid if your doctor has said, you've got a little touch of sugar. Adam Schmitz, A1C should be below 5. If not, you need to work on it. Thank you very much, Adam. That's a very good comment. Yep. Can you repeat that number? Well, a 5 is a good number. It's a great number. Mine has gotten up to 5.6, 5.7, and that's where it started to get when I was, that's when I discovered I was pre-diabetic. And then, again, you could make an argument. I had one reading on my Libre once that was over 200. So technically you could say I have full-blown diabetes. ET himself backed the vid up. I'm not sure what. Martin, awesome. I just checked and mine was 4.9. The goal is to get it to 4.5. Ah, gosh, I'm so jealous. I haven't seen 5 in many, many years. How do you get it down further? Well, you lose body fat and you decrease your carb intake. Rich Peterson, read that statins and heavy exercise raise the CLC scores, calcium scores. Yes, mine is 1700, and both of these probably raised mine. Yes. And going off carbs and losing body fat. That's the biggest item. ET himself, lower the total carbs. I don't hear much in eat much in carbs, but I eat lots of veggies and beans. The big place where you have problems, and people consider it part of a plant-based diet, is grains, pastas, breads. That's where you just get hammered with huge amounts of carbs. Adam Schmitz, Martin, go keto, add muscle, monitor how foods affect your blood sugar using a CGM. That's what I mentioned, a Libre a few minutes ago. It's a great little white plastic button with a not a needle on the back, a filament on the back. You just pop it onto the back of your arm and you get your blood glucose readings over the next 2 weeks, 24/7. You should see your blood glucose decrease at the wee hours of the morning, just like you should see blood pressure decrease at the wee hours of the morning, 1, 2, 3 o'clock. People complain about the Libre. It's challenging. Sometimes it's really off. most of the people that I've worked with that have real problems with it found out, oh, lo and behold, I was taking 2 grams of vitamin C. Half a gram or more of vitamin C in a day is clearly enough to throw off a Libre. Adam Schmidt's, beans are high in carbs. Yes, they are. Now, that's an interesting point, Adam. One of the things that you find, and I have plenty of patients. I've got plenty of patients who are full-blown diabetic whose blood sugars rarely get over 120. Now, how do they do that? They eat to the glucometer. They lose the weight that they need to lose. And beans, and especially lentils, are the big wild card. You know, when I said eat to the glucometer, one of the things, there are a couple of recurring surprises that patients find. One is, you know, I took a carb vacation. I went and had pizza with my son, and I expected my blood sugar to go way up. But we went for a walk afterwards. It wasn't a big workout. I wasn't running. I wasn't lifting weights. I wasn't doing any high intensity intervals. But it just took the top right off of that carb spike, that blood sugar spike. Yeah, gentle walking will do that. Eating to the glucometer, one of the things you find, and people find that quite often with their Libre, is they expected beans to not cause a problem. They expected lentils to not cause a problem. And especially about half of my diabetics, pre-diabetics, when they eat lentils, their blood sugar will just go straight up as if they were eating pasta. Vagabond Sojourner, I've been on LC diet, low carb diet with low statin for 9 months. Low dose statin. Cholesterol's down, C-reactive protein is 0.5, but my insulin and glucose went up, giving me bad HOMA-IR results. Is it true statins can push IR? Yes, it is. But Vagabond, I am not the fan. Everybody says, oh, well, you know, the definitive study for prediabetes and diabetes is the HOMA-IR. The problem with the vast majority of HOMA-IRs is they're based on a still shot evidence view. In other words, one fasting glucose. I see it all the time. Like the patient I described earlier today had a fasting glucose of 92, 93, yet he was full-blown diabetic. His HOMA-IR, as measured by the vast majority of ways that you look at HOMA-IR, would have been great, yet he was diabetic. You have to use a challenge, a moving picture. You have to see how the body responds. Just doing a ratio of fasting glucose to fasting insulin is not a great way to look at this. And the vast majority of HOMA-IRs, there are other HOMA-IRs which do look at a, excuse me, look at a moving picture, but the vast majority of them don't. And just because you're looking at a ratio between insulin and glucose does not mean it's a definitive study at all. I see it all the time. Please do an OGTT with insulin response or do a Kraft Insulin Survey. That's what the Kraft Insulin Survey is all about. Kenneth H. Tim Russell was fat and definitely had fatty liver. He was overweight. His waist circumference was pushing 40 at the time that he died. But you know what? He did the stress test. There were some things going on with his blood pressure and a couple of other things. He did the stress test. He said, I'm good. No, he wasn't. He had problems. And having a waist circumference that over 35 or above is a big deal. And it wasn't Russell, it was Tim Russert. ET himself, beans are carbs, big time, as they are starchy veggies. Ivor was real strange with COVID. Unfortunately, I thought so too. It's like that. It's so amazing. You know, I'm studying dualistic thinking right now. I teach. I'm a backup teacher for Sunday school in a Christian church, and you know, one of the things about Christians is they tended to give up meditation. Well, 1,000 years ago. And it was only recently under Thomas Merton and some other folks that they began to start realizing we need to get back to meditation. The point behind all of this is meditation gets you to stop this dualistic thinking where you have to think that everything is either good or bad. The reality is everything's not either black or white, good or bad. Things are in gradations of gray. That's enough. I'll get off of that soapbox. ET himself start reading labels. Absolutely. Thank you so much. It was a great suggestion, ET. Martin, what about soft bouncy plaque? Never heard it called bouncy, Martin, but soft plaque is what causes the risk, because you go back, Martin, and you look at the autopsy done on Tim Russert. The pathologist said, oh gosh, I went into his arteries in his heart, and it looked like the face of a teenager with a bad case of acne. These little pustules all over the place, whiteheads. And what happened? One of those whiteheads broke. When that pus came out, it formed a clot. That clot blocked the artery in his heart. And when that artery blocked, a large portion of his heart tissue lost oxygenation. When it lost oxygenation, it went into a chaotic rhythm called VFib, ventricular fibrillation. On the TV shows where they come running in with the defibrillator and they have the two paddles and they put them on the chest and they say, clear. That's what they're dealing with. They're dealing with the VFib that killed Tim Russert and kills so many people. With half the people that die from that, half the people that have a heart attack have VFib and have immediate death, sudden death. It's called sudden cardiac death, and we've done videos on that. Sudden cardiac death comes from VFib, and that's what happens. It's some of that soft, bouncy plaque releases. It causes a clot. The clot stops, clogs the artery, and you go into VFib. Now, that's what this thing about having defibrillators all over the place. They did actually have a defibrillator in his office, I think. He was the bureau chief for the DC office for whatever news. It was one of the top 3 news offices at that time. They tried local defibrillation, didn't work. They took him to the hospital and again pronounced him dead. Rose Vanderagen, keto is a problem, only good for short-term weight loss. Well, Rose, I would tell you, I've got plenty of people that have been on keto for years. I think those folks would say, it's not short-term for me. Adam Schmitz, I think insulin, vitamin D, and calcium are all interlinked. You're not the only one that thinks that, Adam. There's some studies, just like any study, they've been criticized, but there's a couple of guys who've done a ton of studies indicating that vitamin D or lack of vitamin D is a critical risk factor for diabetes. ET himself, Martin, I bet. I don't really trust, my calcium score went from 670 to 970 in 3 years on keto. Thank you so much, my high Hemi. I have PVC arteries now. And people don't like that. I wish I didn't have calcified arteries either, but that means I'd have to get rid of all the calcium in my arteries, and that's not likely to happen. ET himself, how do you highlight? Well, not sure what the question is. Just Rusty, my LT long-term care insurer offered free CIMT and a few other tests through a third-party provider. I want to accept, but I'm way off the cattle call nature of the provider. Doesn't the CIMT require? Great. Yes, there are. There's those trucks that go around that do these things. I'm blanking on the names of, some of the big ones, but it is a cattle car type of operation. And they actually do a CIMT. They'll call it a CIMT. I've worked with several of the ultrasonographers that used to work on those, and their perspective is you just can't get the quality that we need. You're going too fast. You got to be very careful on how you do what's called the interrogation, where you put that ultrasound wine. So I think that's a good concern. I don't recommend the cattle car operations either, just Rusty. Rose, of course I did. Well, I used I'm sorry. When you guys are going back and forth with each other, I'm not sure that it's helpful for other people. I'm on rosuvastatin. Martin's on rosuvastatin. I have FH. A great point, Martin. Thank you for sharing that. FH stands for familial hypercholesterolemia. And that is a real problem with LDL, cholesterol. LDL is what a lot of people call the bad cholesterol. Neither LDL nor HDL are good or bad. You just have to look at the subtypes of of particles in there, and it's the small dense LDL that's the significant risk factor, not the large fluffy ones. Because of what I do, I have a lot of people on that have FH. There's a gene pool, French-Canadian gene pool with world-class FH LDL numbers. These are, if you're worried about whether or not you have potential FH, if you've ever had an LDL level 180 or above, you've got a very good shot of having it. Either that or being what's called a lean mass hyperresponder, and there's significant overlap between those two groups. Trying to get to some comments that make sense for the rest of us. Carbs are everything for a low A1C. I would agree with that. Thank you, E.T. How to improve, Peter Utsi, how to improve endothelial health and what are the most harmful foods and habits? By far, the biggest issue is anything that that causes prolonged hyperglycemia, too much blood sugar, or anything that causes too much insulin. By far, those are the most common things. You can see other things too. Some people with FH, with these 300 LDL levels of 300, that can cause some inflammation. Rheumatoid arthritis. Most people are aware of that disease, but they don't know that it causes as much risk for heart attack and stroke as diabetes. Why? Because it's an inflammatory disease. Other inflammatory diseases like psoriatic arthritis, those are a big deal as well for heart attack and stroke. And how? Because they damage the endothelium, as you're asking, Peter. But for the vast majority of us, 80% of us, it's aging or getting too much body fat to the point to where we are routinely having too much insulin or too much glucose in our blood. So Rose is saying sugar's a problem. She's also saying so is saturated fat. I will tell you, Rose, take a look at our videos, the book on The Big Fat Surprise by Nina Teicholz, and then take a look at what you can say, well, she's not a scientist. She's a reporter. She's actually not a bad scientist. And her book stimulated a lot more research into saturated fat, including some really good meta-analyses, which are really throwing into question just how bad is saturated fat. Maybe it's not as bad as you think. Sugar is a carb. There's no question about it. Again, I tend to see more risk in most American diets from complex carbs like bread, which brings up a really good point. People say, well, and you see that in the ADA diet, eat whole grains. Look at the glycemic value of whole grain versus white bread. Everybody understands that white bread's bad for you. The glycemic value of whole grain bread is almost the same. And for both of them, it's higher than sugar. So be aware, think about it. Processed food is full of carbs. Processed for the most part. If I take the Prolon diet, Walter Longo's diet, which has been proven to be helpful because it can decrease body fat, which helps drive this problem. But my blood sugar will spike on the Walter Longo Prolon diet. Even though it's not heavy carbs, it's enough carbs, and more than anything else, like the tomato soup, these soups are highly processed. In other words, the vegetable carbs in them have been ground down to a tiny amount. Therefore, all the surface value, all the surface for the carbs, these complex carbs, is available immediately when it hits your stomach and your bloodstream. And so I'll get spikes of 180. I've demonstrated that on video. It's a simple carb. Yeah, sugar does pour right into your system, so it's a problem. Beans and vegetables do not. That's not true, Rose. Again, take a look. Eat to the glucometer. Eat beans, eat lentils, and see what they do to your blood sugar. Beans and potatoes will raise your blood sugar dramatically. Thank you, Adam. How to control for, well, they're getting into some side debate here regarding the blue zone stuff. And the blue zones are like the island of Okinawa, the area in California where the Seventh-day Adventists live. A couple of places in Italy. One of the places where Walter Longo happens to be from. I'm blanking on the name of the area, but it's like you see these, well, they don't eat meat. Well, therefore, if we don't eat meat, we're going to be healthy. I think in most of those populations, I think not eating meat tends to be more of an indicator of folks that are not obese. But that's just a pet theory of mine. I will, again, won't get deep into that debate, that side debate. What a dilemma. And Rose is saying beans and vegetables are not simple sugars. Yeah, take a look at, again, Rose, I would ask you, have you done a lot of work with yourself and with other patients who are eating to the glucometer, eating beans and starchy vegetables like potatoes, and measuring their blood sugars? It's one thing to say that they don't. That's a little bit theoretical. Not really. So, Jean Lafortune, I have plaque. What is the best treatment? Well, we've been talking about that. I hope you picked it up. If you've been listening, I think you would have. Wear CGM and experiment. I would agree, Rose. Wear CGM and experiment. Okay. We're having a debate on the side here, and I'm trying to, I'm just going to skip over Rose and Adam while they have their debate. We seem to have gotten into a major complex carb, vegetarian, plant-based debate here. And it's the same thing over and over again and again. And saying that vegetarians live longer. Well, let me see if I can find. Okay, here's Alan Turner. Does a high LP(a) score contribute significantly to plaque, resulting in high calcium scores? Are Repatha and niacin the only available treatments? If so, what dosage of each? Most people have not heard of LP(a). That's how you pronounce it. And most people don't even know how to pronounce it when they see that for the first time. It's called LP(a). Bob, I'm having what was his name? Somebody help me with fact checking. He was the fellow that had a heart attack associated with LP(a). Harper, Bob Harper. How would I know him? Again, he was very well known. He was in his early 50s, the major health coach for The Biggest Loser. And everybody looked at him. He was thin, muscular, worked out all the time. And then he had a heart attack. Oh, my Lord. And then he came out within the week and said, yeah, I've got LP(a). Up until that time, many people in medical science was very much aware of the risk associated with LP little a, but because they couldn't figure out what to do for it, nobody ever looked at it, and nobody ever told their patients about it. Well, there are things to do for it. For example, niacin has been demonstrated to decrease LP little a. There's some other impacts as well, other things that will impact. In order to talk about those two items, the Repatha, the niacin, the statins, you have to think about what is LP little a. LP little a is a subpopulation of LDL, the quote bad cholesterol. That's not really quote bad cholesterol. It's a certain type. It's a genetic variation. And it's been demonstrated multiple times that if you have significant LP little a, that in and of itself can and will cause increased heart attack and stroke risk. So I went down that bunny hole to prep people for the next comment that I would make. Then statins and PCSK9s, like Repatha, the new biomedical drug for genetically developed biomedical drug for LDL, should help. Yes and no. I mean, sometimes they help, sometimes they even make it worse, but sometimes they help. Now, so what are we to do? Up until now, and still for the next few months, maybe a few years, the major tools that we've had for dealing with LP little a are, number one, manage all the other risks. So for example, if you look at the Mayo Clinic head of cardiology, he would say, what to do for LP little a? Give him a statin, because he's thinking about giving statins for any kind of cardiovascular risk. I would say, lifestyle. And then, as you know, there are other things, supplements and medications to look at as well. One of the supplements, niacin, has been demonstrated to decrease the level of LP little a. Like everything, there's a major debate around niacin. And I've covered, if you don't know that debate, and looking at things like, I think it was it the All Hat study or the DPS2 Thrive? Don't remember right now, but there's studies which show some challenges with niacin. I've got about half a dozen videos in a series on niacin. If you have more questions about that, take a look. Protein can turn into sugar. Well, Adam, that's true. I would question this. How significant is protein turning into sugar? And as people say, you'll hear Jason Fung, for example, talk about, well, protein can stimulate insulin. I think the jury's still out on just how much that actually happens. In fact, I'm a little bit skeptical that a lot of protein is causing significant insulin or glucose-related risk. Again, we're going into the Adam and Rose debate. So let me see if we've got anything else other than Adam. Here's Bart. Rose, you're watching. Thank you very much. Bart, I appreciate it. Yeah, Rose, if you would, I would ask you to please just calm down a little bit. Is K2 helpful clearing and cleaning arteries? Yes, K2. Yes, we think. Is it definitive? No, the jury's still out on that, Lamine Kadri. I'd be asked, where are you from, Lamine? And is that where's your original family from? I'm curious. So K2, I've got a series of videos on K2. It's a great supplement. People say, well, it takes calcium out of your arteries. I would also say not so fast. It very well may, but I think it's a little bit different from what most people assume, that it takes calcium out of your artery walls and puts it in your bones. K2 is actually a part of something that stimulates and what we call carboxylates. a couple of enzymes. One of them is osteocalcin, and a couple of others. And we're getting into some technical medical terms. Here's what at the end of the day, here's what I think actually happens is that vitamin K2 actually helps those of us with age-related prediabetes and diabetes reverse that process. And that's how it helps in terms of calcification. E.T., great chat, informative. Thank you so much, Martin. I appreciate that, and I appreciate your interest, and I appreciate you having some manners. Not all of us are having good manners today. Mihai Hemi. I do K2 and D3, but not sure it's helping my calcium reduction, though, giving niacin a shot. Neil is a lucky man to see Dr. Brewer. Well, thank you so much, Peter. Peter, we're still open. I'm still seeing patients. We're closing it off as the as the Alabama project grows. Orville Nation would love to interview sometime on our new health channel if you're open to it, Dr. Brewer. Have followed you for quite some time. Orville, you give Michelle a call at 859-721-1414. That's 859-721-1414. And thank you so much for your interest. Keto's not carnivore. There's Rose again. Actually, I'm using ginger garlic. Let me see what else we've got here. Fort Worth West Side. Good to hear from you, Fort Worth. Some sources say we can't make plaque go away. You can make plaque go away. And if you think, well, you know, Brewer is one of those crazy internet docs. Look, I used to teach at Johns Hopkins. I'm not that crazy. And I do talk a lot more about some standard stuff that people really hate me for. And that is, you know, I do use statins. I do use other medications. Here's the thing. If you don't have to trust me, go to Harvard. I mean, who complains about Harvard being crazy? Maybe if you work at Harvard, you might. But Harvard Health newsletter had a coverage once where they were talking about, of course you can make plaque go away. There are two places where we've seen it over and over and over again. And I would agree with them. It does happen. And here's the two places that you tend to see plaque go away. One is significant weight loss, 30 pounds or more. Happens all the time. Happens. I mean, it's not, I say all the time, it's not common, but it does happen. Those of you who are statin haters, close your ears for a second while I'd say the other time that we tend to see reversal of plaque. And that was probably what happened with my own personal reversal of plaque than anything else, because I lost about 8 pounds, but I went from 73-year-old arteries to 57-year-old arteries in about 18 months. And for me, it was probably that other reason that the Harvard folks mention about reversing plaque, and that is somebody who's never been on a statin starting a statin. So the statin haters can open your ears again. We've got another super chat. Thanks as always. Tired Looking for Name. Tired Looking for Name is a great supporter. We really appreciate that. As you see, Gilbert's showing you, if you'd like to do a super chat, these kind of dollars are significant. Gilbert's in the Philippines. We've got a team of folks in the Philippines and a team of folks in Mexico. The Mexican team are some really good public health docs, preventive docs, working on content. Gilbert and the other production guys are in the Philippines, and $20 makes a big difference in those economies. So thank you again, Tired Looking for Name. So a lot of background comments about niacin. What are the standard doses? I usually recommend people take start with 250 milligrams. Taking 50 milligrams of niacin really doesn't have an impact. If you talk to the cardiologists and other folks that do use niacin, most of them will say, you're not going to get any preventive impact until you get to 2 grams or more. I don't really believe that either, because I've got plenty of patients who are getting a significant improvement in their lipid panel as well as inflammation panel on as low as 250. Most of the time they get it up to 500. Here's another thing to think about. The problem with niacin is the flush. And I can tell you, I remember trying it, 10, 20 years ago, when we were just discovering some of the benefits of niacin, and we didn't have any of the long-acting stuff, any of the other stuff. I remember once taking some, and a few hours later, I was in church and doing some choir stuff. I don't do choir anymore, but all of a sudden, I felt like somebody had grabbed me by the hair, pulled it up, and was scalping me. It's just major burn right through there. And it was like, and it took me a few minutes to figure out what was going on. And at that point, I decided, oh, yeah, that's niacin. And I don't think I can take that anymore. Things have changed. There were actually multiple different versions of niacin that are, quote, no flush. Be very, very picky about what you do take in that area. There was a lot of them where they added lapropiant, a chemical that decreases the flush. You see, niacin is like a prostaglandin. Again, a very technical medical term. What a prostaglandin is, like a locally acting hormone almost. Well, when you add lapropiant to niacin, it does get rid of the flush, but it also, unfortunately, appears to get rid of any positive impact as well. So if you're taking, quote, no flush niacin because it has lapropiant, it's no flush because it has lapropiant, you're throwing your money away. Don't do that. There are a couple of brands. I don't know all the brands that actually have an impact that are safe to take, but I do know two from working with some folks that had studied this deeply. One is Rugby brand, RUGBY, and the other is Enduracin. Now, I've recommended both of those. I've taken both of those. We tend to find a little bit better patient tolerance with the Enduracin. And Enduracin is just a wax-based matrix. So you've got a wax matrix. And what happens is it's a long-acting, long-release form of niacin. Can't take niacin either. No flush does nothing. Well, so Martin, the Enduracin and Rugby, both, they're not no flush, but they're long acting and they clearly do something. And yes, you'll get some episodes, but you really don't get that much from either one of them. So I would ask you, Martin, thank you very much for putting that out there. And I would ask you to take a second look if you're wanting to take a look at niacin. Again, I have tons of people having very little flush. They have some, but not very much with those two brands. Again, Enduracin more than Rugby even. Martin, let's see if we've got anything else here. We're coming. Well, oh my Lord, I thought we were coming to the end of the comments. But no, there's just a ton more. Flushing with niacin is greatly reduced over time. That's another point. Thank you so much, Mezzanine, for sharing that. It's greatly reduced over time. If you can just get beyond some of that challenge. Less flushing if taking with meals. Less flushing if taking, you take it and then you jump in 20 minutes before you're going to take a shower. That helps. Some people like to take it in the morning so it doesn't bother them when they go to sleep. Some people take it before they go to sleep and don't notice the flush. Wish I still had a calcium score of 57. I do too. The last time I looked, I've only done it once. And I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago, I had a calcium score of 100. Is this a forum for, thank you for the West Side. I would agree, Rose, that it's very related, but this is not a forum, a debate forum kind of format. It really isn't. So please have a little bit more respect for other folks who have questions rather than just wanting to get on and bombard the comment section with debates. And you can clearly have your opinion, but it's like, what have we got here? 50 different comments of restatements of opinion. Okay, Otis Page, carotid artery, 75 blockage. What is 70? Oh, 75% blockage, probably. Do you recommend statins even with weight loss and keto diet? A couple of points. Number one, legally, I can't make a recommendation for you, but I can say, I can't actually, and here's why I can't make a clear statement regarding that. It's like, do you still have diabetes? Do you know whether you have diabetes, prediabetes? Do you have, what's causing this plaque in the first place? How old are you? You know, if you're 85, you know, that might be it's clearly a different story from somebody in their 50s. You know, we have to have all of these other answers before we start saying, well, doc, just tell me what to do medically on this channel. Insulin resistance is the biggest risk factor for cardiovascular disease. Thank you so much, Janice Johnsons. I agree, clearly. Relation to Peter Grant, relation to magnesium causing too much calcium. That's a possibility. I have not gone too deep into that question because, again, there's just so much focus that we need to have in terms of insulin resistance itself. Bart, thank you so much. Insulin resistance is the elephant in the room that we talk about it on this channel, but unfortunately, nobody else does. Lamine Kadri, hi from Algeria. We haven't had anybody from Algeria yet either. Thank you so much, Lamine. Liamine. Oh, tell me how to pronounce that sometime. Another great thank you and super chat button from Peter Grant, $20. Thank you again, Peter. We appreciate it. And the Filipino team, the Mexican team, they all appreciate it. I appreciate it because I tend to support this, as you can see, with my time and retirement and patient care. We be careful about A1C too low. Our randomized clinical trials show increased mortality with A1C less than 5. My A1C has dropped to 4.8, but not a reflection of glucose control. So, Bob, thank you very much. This is a great point. I don't remember if that was I can't remember the name of those studies right now. There were several studies that said that. And so one of the things they decided is, especially for older patients, don't try to get their A1C too low. But Bob, go back and look at how they achieved a low A1C. They achieved, in those studies that showed that, they achieved this low A1C by medicating with insulin and other prescription level medications. That's a very dangerous way to get a low A1C, and I do not recommend that. Don't get a low A1C using prescription medications. However, there's no study that I'm aware of, if you're aware of it, please show me, where the method for achieving low A1C was lifestyle, not medication. Thank you again, Bob. Great point. Gave me a great opportunity to go down a bunny hole. Okay, thank you again, Rose. Okay, Jim Clark, thank you. Have you been able to convince my cardiologist of your teachings? Well, that's exciting to hear, and in a much better place than I was before. I could be a 70-year-old poster child for your beliefs and practices. Jim Clark Sr., thank you so much for that comment, and that's what keeps us going. You know, it's not a minor thing to be acknowledged that you're saving lives, and that's exactly what we get on a regular basis. Matthew Heyman, I've heard about amla powder. Well, I'm not going. I've read a glucose and insulin challenge with crazy high results if you have been low carb. No, going low carb doesn't make you have an extremely high glucose and insulin when challenged. That's just not true. You've read about it, but why don't you try it? Johnny F. Calcium score of 12 and doc wants me to be on a statin. Over 70 and pushed back. Thoughts? The same thoughts I was said earlier. I would need to know a lot more about what's going on with you, Johnny. Do you have diabetes? And if so, how much? What level? Or do you have other drivers of cardiovascular status? And if you want to get to that level of detail, you want to see me as a patient, again, call Michelle at 859-721-1414. Love Thomas Martin. Done retreats at Gethsemane. I live in Lexington, Kentucky, so we've been down there. It's a very interesting looking place. Something sounds terrible. Does it matter where the calcium is found in the calciums? Well, I will tell you this. There's an artery called it's the LAD, left anterior descending Widowmaker. And that's where everybody says, that's where you're going to get that's where I got my increase in calcium. That's where I've got my plaque. It's right there in the Widowmaker. I'm in huge trouble. Almost everybody that has plaque in their arteries has it right there in the Widowmaker. So whether that's the risk that you think it is, it's a different question. Is it true that LDL-C will likely be higher if in process of losing quite a bit of weight? Here's what you might be talking about, Gator Beer Geek. Interesting name. Now, if you go low carb, it's been documented multiple times that you can get a thing called lean mass hyperresponder. Dave Feldman. This is the first time I've remembered Dave Feldman's name in several mentions on the channel. He's got a channel and a website. I think it's called Cholesterol Code. And he's an engineer. He's not a doc, but he's documented something very helpful, and that is lean mass hyperresponder. That's when you go on a low carb, no carb diet, and your LDL starts climbing. Now, for the most part, so you can read that, go gear into that, look at it, watch his videos. And for the most part, I would agree with what he's saying. And then for the most part, several others would, including, the Harvard Health newsletter. The one place that I don't agree is he says that it's totally separate from FH, familial hypercholesterolemia, which somebody mentioned earlier. And I can tell you, no, there is significant overlap in terms of the two populations that have FH, but also are lean mass hyperresponders. And we've got several videos on the channel about that. TS Saravanad, LDL's going up annually. Last 2 years since low carb. Now with a 234 score, that's LDL. So pretty much by definition, you see a 234 on LDL. It's usually either a lean mass hyperresponder or an FH, or as I just mentioned, could be both. Cardiologist suggested vegetarian diet, and I feel pressure for statin. Rosuvastatin decreased animal products worked for me. What diet do you recommend for PAH? Have a question, a puzzler, my white count's down. We're not going to talk about white count today. Sorry, we've got too many people with too many questions that are on topic. One solution, Johnny's got a great solution here. Just don't grow old. Wish that. How do you do that, Johnny? 50 plus, how frequent to do a calcium scan? The standard is 5 years or more. So again, don't do a calcium score every year, 3 times a year. And Rose, please be respectful of the others. What's the optimal hemoglobin A1C? You get back into that debate. And again, like I said earlier, I have seen several of the videos I've read and analyzed several of the studies that say, oh no, it's dangerous to get below 5. Go back and look and see. To me, I think it's great. If you can get below 5, which I can, or haven't been able to with the lifestyle that I have. I travel a lot and I'm not completely keto. I usually keep my carbs reliably 100 or less, but quite often keto as well. I don't get below 5. And despite what you heard from, I think it was Bob Bell, it was one of the commenters a few minutes ago said that there's some risk going below 5. Like I said, clearly risk going below 5 if you're using prescription medications to get there, but using lifestyle, not so much. Longo's great. Your insulin probably spikes because you've been doing keto for 2. Oh, come on, Rose, please. Charles Lastly, Repatha. Views, please. I'm not sure what that question is. Food fight. Yes. It's unfortunate that, you provide some public forum here. And, what's the old adage about, anyhow, won't say it. Randomized clinical trials show A1C at 5 to 5.2 gives best total mortality. I'm not going to repeat the response to that. I think we're getting to where statins don't always work for Lp(a). That's true. Haven't seen OAG. Been here lately. I haven't. I've talked to him because I'm in Alabama now with the Lower Alabama projects, and I did talk to OAG a couple of months ago. Orville Nation, another super chat. Thank you so much, Orville. I appreciate that. Guys, it's getting late, long in the tooth, and I have some patients I need to see. Like I said before, not going to be able to get all of the comments dealt with today. Thank you so much for your interest, and we'll see you next week.